We're talking with TreasuryXpress on digital bank connectivity, the transformational impacts on Treasury. And I'm here with Anis and Tom from TreasuryXpress. Welcome to this version of the FinTech Hot Seat.
Hi, Craig. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's begin with a definition and what's going on. How would you describe Treasury transformation on a technology front? Maybe what's happened recently, and then we'll go from there.
As you know, when you implement a TMS, the first step to implement the TMS is the bank connectivity. How do I connect to the market data provider? How do I connect to my banks to get my statements? If you don't accomplish this task, you don't have a TMS. It's not, you don't have a proper implementation. So what happened recently, I would say the last 2 years in terms of banking connectivity to the market data is that we are seeing on the market what we call the API. And this API is changing completely how we connect to the market data. All the protocols that we have in place right now are old. You know, Swift and the host-to-host connectivity and the SFTP protocol. It's a technology that belongs to the 80s. It's really old. And the APIs, what is really nice with the APIs, you go fast, you implement fast, you connect fast. It's almost extremely cheaper than all the existing connectivity protocols. Mm-hmm. And it will allow you to do real-time data. You can connect through the API to your banks to get the statements anytime you want during the day and as much as you want.
Let's define a couple terms there. So you talked about connectivity, a couple different models. One is like an FTP or through Swift. FTP, you're doing this dial out, there's a handshake, there's passwords exchanged, and now you're talking about APIs, application programming interfaces. What's different about that? You said it's very fast. What's different? How does that technology work differently? Because if it's transformational, let's just have a basic understanding of APIs.
Whether it's SFTP or Swift, the issue is with the administration process of the onboarding. As you have just mentioned, it's easy. You know, it's just API address and user password. But the administration protocol that you have to implement in place, like you have to whitelist the IP of the bank, or you have to whitelist your IP to be able to connect with the banks must accept to send you to your Swift address the statements or to your SFTP. It's not always very simple. On the other hand, the API, if you have a system that can understand the API language and you can really connect through API, it's on the spot. You just need to put your API credentials, the web banking credentials, and that's it. Automatically, you can connect to your banks to get the data, which is not the case with the Swift. Swift, for example, you have to implement the token. You have some administration process that you have to follow with the banks to be able to have it in place. Same process for the SFTP or FTP or host-to-host. It's always the same path that you have to take from an administration perspective, which is not the same case in the API.
Anis outlined quite well what the sort of main methods of connectivity are. I think more importantly, for a Treasury point of view, you have to understand you don't just do one. Companies out there will suggest one or suggest two. There's no one fit all. We go out and we may do 4 types of connectivity. We do APIs, Swift, SFTP, we even do email integration. I think the main thing to understand, the transformation that's happened from our end is the acceptance of customers and treasurers out there understanding it's not one method. You should use all 3 or all 4 to get up as fast as possible, which has led to the transformation of being a speedy and fast implementation that is also low cost. So you don't have to throw money at it to get it in place. You can say, actually, I want to cherry pick what the cheapest options are with the banks in order to get the best solution for myself.
So let's go through a couple examples of what are the connectivity types. You had mentioned market data, bank information, payments. Is that the landscape we're mostly focused on here? Are there more? Or what are we thinking about?
Yeah, we're having, for each functionality, you are having an API right now. When I talked about the market data provider, I meant, for example, a couple of years ago, if you want to convert your foreign exchange positions, you have to buy a Bloomberg terminal or a Reuters terminal. Now you have some API that you can pay for $20 per month, and you have all the conversion rates that you require into your TMS to convert to your base currency the foreign exchange position. And I think tomorrow we're going to have also an API for, for the commodities, for any functionality in Treasury, we're going to have an API. And this is completely changing the whole structure of the market. Instead of implementing heavy systems where you need to connect to each source of data through a very heavy task, now with a system capable to understand the API, you can have it quickly and implement it quickly.
And I think it's not, as you say, just market data providers or anything else or just banks. We're integrating with HR systems to know when someone leaves a company in order to enact a change on the signers with accounts. We're looking at attaching invoice systems to come and feed a URL so we can look at the invoice and the payment. It's not just the traditional areas where we can link in. Anything that can be linked should be linked in order to make a streamlined process. So it does seem as one universe everything resides in. And I think, again, the adoption of this is becoming more frequent.
We move beyond market data. What are the next steps? What else is happening? And then I want to get into how this change is impacting, what the horizon is of this impact of API, open APIs existing to support what goes on.
Even the last few weeks, like the changes in our system have been, we're now, the next link is perhaps linking to your Outlook. So you can see when you're in a meeting or when you're not, or when you're on holiday, do we automatically reassign a signature to it? So it's further developing what we have existingly and integrating much more to make that more or less real time. So you have much more information in a click, so you can say, actually, yes, this person is in a meeting, let's go and switch this to user B or user C. But beyond that, I think we're looking at a lot more things, particularly around trade finance, looking at going to SME market for perhaps going to suppliers for debt. So rather than going to traditional methods, going to like Funding Circle in the UK, where they can go and get a small business loan. And being able to do it all through one screen rather than the traditional methods of ringing up a bank, negotiating the term. They can go out to market through our solution, which is much more integrated with these types of newer technology that enables them to borrow money, do FX trades at a cheaper rate than they can with banks.
So does this mean, having a system that's using open APIs, connecting to different areas, does this mean the direction of technology development in Treasury should be a bigger, larger, single system? Or does it just mean it needs to be able to connect to any system internally and externally? Is this going to make it more discrete or more comprehensive in terms of a solution?
I think it should be open. It's like it should be it's like an open source. It's a TMS. I think for the coming years should be an open source system that it's like you can add any extension to it. You can connect it to any external system providing a service that you don't have. I don't see why we are closing why a TMS should be closed. It should be an open source system.
I mean, if you look at what we've done recently, like we put out a press release this morning about hedge books and how we've now integrated via a single API to track all the FX hedging, all the instruments in there, and it's fed through a single API, and it takes 15 seconds, and all reporting comes back in. We've done the same with the FX side and the trading side with eBury. So now any customer, rather than going to a bank, can use an API through our front office tool and get a much, much better rate than them. And we recognize that these companies out there do this much better than we ever will be able to do it. So why not use them and partner to our advantage than try and build this in-house or acquire them? It would be extremely expensive and exhaustive process to try and catch up with them. So let's just go and partner with them more so. So you're absolutely right saying the open API and open system should be the way forward.
In fact, in other words, instead of coding these missing functionalities in your TMS, why not you open your TMS and to connect to another external provider who's expert in this field, like Hedgebook? Why should I have a hedging functionality in my system if I can partner with someone who is, it's really his main expertise and he's good in it? I just need to connect it to our system, and then you can profit from both sides.
So we went through a couple examples, and you said what's happening now. You're connecting to APIs. There's some regulations that support this. PSD2 requires banks, European banks, to expose their data. We've seen that influence in the U.S., and I know there's an impact globally where they're making that available through that connection, not just through secure FTP. So things are happening. Where are we now, and what's next? When I say what's next in 3 months, 6 months? And then when will this become the dominant method of connecting?
In fact, the API technology at the banks exists already. It's not something new, but each bank has its own API. What PSD2 is doing in Europe, which is really amazing about it, is that it's one API to all the European banks, which will ease extremely the process. Because if I can today connect, I can today connect to all the API of the banks. But if I have a client who has 20 different banks, I'm gonna have a library of 20 different API. It's feasible, but it's also heavy. You're gonna have to manage all the connectivity in and out. On the other hand, the PSD2, the revolution, the transformation that PSD2 is doing in Europe, it's one API. They can publish one API for all the banking community. In terms of deadline, I think each, with the banks take time to to agree all of them on one API. So they are doing a lot of deadlines that each time they push it to another date. So I think 2019 it should be the deadline to have this PSD2 API, one API for all the banks in Europe.
So anything going on the private innovation front that we need to be thinking about too, as we expand and wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, I think there's some other exciting things out there. I mean, I heard earlier on a speech you're talking about AI and machine learning. It's all very good looking at that, how that affects Treasury. If you're cash forecasting or looking at your trade financing area and supply chain. I think where we're looking at it is from a security point of view. So what I mean by that is if we can have an AI solution in our system that learns the trends of users. So let's say every morning I go in and I create my Treasury wires and send them off. Let's say I then start doing my third-party vendor payments and my salaries. The system will learn over time what each user can do, and when there's an interruption in their normal exercise or activities, it will halt this payment. And that, I think, is much more useful in the near time for Treasury, because they understand how processes work, and to halt it using AI will always then help the biggest threat, which is internal fraud. So I think that's where we're looking next at, is integrating into existing areas of our system further detection to prevent anything bad happening.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's an interesting idea, right? It's learning the patterns. It's being able to detect what was anomalous to existing activity. You can also plug in things, certain types of the speed of payments, other items, initial parameters, but then captured over time. Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for talking to us about the transformation of Treasury using connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.